Hi, hey Mac, Mrs. Bosworth here again. Going to share chapters 5 and 6 of Because of Winn-Dixie with you. In the last two chapters, we learned a little bit more about India Opal Baloney's mom. If you remember, she left the family when she was only 3 years old, so she's been living alone with the preacher. Now she's got her new friend, Winn-Dixie. We're going to see what adventures they have together. Chapter 5. Winn-Dixie couldn't stand to be left alone. We found that out real quick. If me and the preacher went off and left him by himself in the trailer, he pulled all the cushions off the couch and all the toilet paper off the roll. So we started tying him up outside with a rope when we left. That didn't work either. Winn-Dixie howled until Samuel, Mrs. Detweller's dog, started howling too. It was exactly the kind of noise that people in an adult trailer park do not like to hear. "He just doesn't want to be left alone," I told the preacher. "That's all. Let's take him with us." I could understand the way Winn-Dixie felt. Wonder how India can understand Winn-Dixie. Might have something to do with because the way her mom left. Getting left behind probably made his heart feel empty. After a while, the preacher gave in, and everywhere we went, we took Winn-Dixie, even to church. The Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi isn't a regular-looking church. The building used to be a Picket Quick store, and when you walk in the front door, the first thing you see is the Picket Quick motto. It's written on the floor in little tiny red tiles that make great big letters that say, "Pick, pick, pick, quick, quick, quick." The preacher tried painting over those tiles, but the letters won't stay covered up. So the preacher's just given up, and he let them be. The other thing about the Open Arms that's different from other churches is there aren't any pews. People bring their own fold-up chairs and lawn chairs, and so sometimes it looks more like the congregation is watching a parade or sitting at a barbecue instead of being at church. It's kind of a strange church, and I thought Winn-Dixie would fit right in. But the first time we brought Winn-Dixie to the Open Arms, the preacher tied him up outside the front door. "Why did we bring him all the way here just to tie him up?" I asked the preacher. "Because dogs don't belong in church, Opal," the preacher said. "That's why." He tied Winn-Dixie to a tree and said how there was lots of shade for him and that he ought to work out real good. Well, it didn't. The service started and there was some singing and some sharing and some praying, and then the preacher started preaching. And he wasn't there but 2 or 3 words into his sermon when there was a terrible howl coming from outside. The preacher tried to ignore it. "Today," he said. "Ahoo!" said Winn-Dixie. "Please," said the preacher. "Ahoo!" said Winn-Dixie back. "Friends," said the preacher. "Hoof!" wailed Winn-Dixie. Everyone turned their lawn chairs and folded up chairs and looked at one another. "Opal," said the preacher. "Ow!" said Winn-Dixie. "Yes, sir," I said. "Go get that dog," he yelled. "Yes, sir," I yelled back. I went outside and untied Winn-Dixie and brought him inside, and he sat down beside me and smiled up at the preacher, and the preacher couldn't help it. He smiled back. Winn-Dixie had that effect on him. And so the preacher started in preaching again. Winn-Dixie sat there listening to it, wiggling his ears this way and that, trying to catch all the words. Everything would have been all right, except a mouse ran across the floor. The Open Arms had mice. They were there from when it was a Picket Quick. And there were lots of good things to eat in the building. And when the Picket Quick became the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, the mice stayed around to eat all the leftover crumbs from the potluck suppers. The preacher kept on saying he was going to have to do something about them, but he never did. Because the truth is, he couldn't stand the thought of hurting anything, even a mouse. Well, Winn-Dixie saw that mouse, and he was up and after him. One minute everything was quiet and serious, and the preacher was going on and on and on, and the next minute Winn-Dixie looked like a fury bullet shooting across the building, chasing that mouse. He was barking, and his feet were skidding all over the polished picket-quick floor, and people were clapping and hollering and pointing. They really went wild when Winn-Dixie actually caught the mouse. I have never in my life seen a dog catch a mouse, said Mrs. Nordley. She was sitting next to me. He's a special dog, I told her. I imagine so, she said back. Winn-Dixie stood up there in front of the whole church, wagging his tail and holding the mouse real careful in his mouth, holding on to him tight, but not squishing him. I believe that mutt has got some retriever in him, said somebody behind me. That's a hunting dog. Winn-Dixie took the mouse over to the preacher and dropped it at his feet. And when the mouse tried to get away, Winn-Dixie put his paw right on the mouse's tail. Then he smiled up at the preacher. He showed him all his teeth. The preacher looked down at the mouse. He looked at Winn-Dixie. He looked at me. He rubbed his nose. It got real quiet in the picket-quick. Let us pray, the preacher finally said, for this mouse. And everybody started laughing and clapping. The preacher picked up the mouse by the tail, walked, and threw it out the front door of the picket-quick, and everybody applauded again. Then he came back and we all prayed together. I prayed for my mama. I told God how much she would have enjoyed hearing the story of Winn-Dixie catching that mouse. It would have made her laugh. I asked God if maybe I could be the one to tell her that story someday. And then I talked to God about how I was lonely in Naomi, because I didn't know any kids, only the ones from church. And there weren't many kids at the open arms, just Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry, two brothers who weren't twins but looked like they were, and Amanda Wilkinson, whose face was always pinched up like she was smelling something real bad, and Sweetie Pie Thomas, who was only 5 years old and still mostly a baby. And none of them wanted to be my friend anyway, because they probably thought I'd tell on them to the preacher for every little thing they did wrong. Then they would get in trouble with God and their parents. So I told God that I was lonely, even having Winn-Dixie. And finally, I prayed for the mouse, like the preacher suggested. I prayed that he didn't get hurt when he went flying out the door of the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. I prayed that he landed in a nice, soft patch of grass. Chapter 6. I spent a whole lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big, fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little old house full of books, and Miss Franny Block is in charge of all of them. She is a very small, very old woman with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started when Winn-Dixie, not liking it when I went into the library because he couldn't go inside too, but I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look in the window and see me in there, selecting my books. And he was okay, as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn-Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself. All of a sudden, there was this loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block sitting on the floor behind her desk. "Miss Franny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear!" she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He's come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn-Dixie standing on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. "Miss Franny Block," I said, "that's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog, Winn-Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. I'm positive he's my dog. I would know him anywhere." Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said. "Let me help you up. It's okay." I stuck out my hand, and Miss Franny took hold of it, and I pulled her up off the floor. She didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady mistaking a dog for a bear, but that she had had a bad experience with a bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she'd never quite gotten over it. "When did that happen?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, "it was a very long story." "That's okay," I told her. I am like my mamma in that I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn-Dixie come in and listen too? He gets lonely without me." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs are not allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "He'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn-Dixie, and he came in and lay down with a "humph" and a sigh right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, "He most certainly is a large dog." "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "He has a large heart, too." "Well," Miss Franny said. She bent over and gave Winn-Dixie a pat on the head, and Winn-Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffled his nose on her little old lady feet. "Let me get a chair and sit down so I can tell this story properly." All right, my friends, we are going to stop there today, but I hope you'll join me again tomorrow when we learn about how the bear got in to the Herman W. Block Memorial Library and scared Miss Franny. I'll see you then.